Welcome back to your one-stop shop for all things Heroes Esports.
We have coverage from all over the world, a look into some of the top plays that happened last week, and the inside scoop on why your favorite players have their names.
We've got all that and more on Beyond the Nexus.
To start off, the Korean Power League has concluded and Tempo Storm managed to take home the crown. But it wasn't easy. L5 took them all the way to game number 7 in a fantastic series with great play on both sides of the battlefield.
This was an exhausting series that brought out mistakes from both teams. But after they won, Tempo Storm conceded that they felt the exhaustion hit L5 a little harder, and I have to agree. In the second to last game, whether they were too tired or maybe even too hyped because they only needed to win one more game, L5 ended up throwing away a really good early game lead by making a few mistakes in a row. And that really seemed to affect them in the last game because they just weren't quite all on the same page positionally. Dred, you and I talked about the drafting of both of these teams on the Gul'dan patch last week. What did you think of the drafts in this series?
Well, Tempo definitely showed that they are adjusting to the current patch. And there's a really common trend that we see in the Korean scene right now that is just this very heavy melee style composition built around Tyrael. This isn't the first time that we've seen this composition though. Both Korea and China both displayed it early in the summer season all the way through to the Summer Global Championship. It just feels like now it's gained momentum with the core being Rehgar, Greymane, Tyrael, and then just one or more melees to just deathball into your opponents. It seems very hard to deal with unless your opponent has a Falstad to possibly force some panic sanctifications. We'll see if this composition holds true as we move on through fall.
Well, the bonus damage on Greymane's Worgen form was just nerfed back to its original amount. Maybe that's what it will take to make the strategy less dominant.
I mean, the strategy was dominant even when he only did 40%, right? It
True.
was in the summer, it showed even when he only did 40% bonus damage. So if this falls out of favor, I think it's going to be the go for the throat 20% range nerf that really pulls it away from prioritization.
One last thing I wanted to mention about L5. This is a new team. They may still be working on some issues that probably were exacerbated by being exhausted, but they still took out Tempo Storm 3-0 in one series and went 3-4 in this one. That's very impressive.
It is impressive, but Tempo Storm was also possibly ironing out some issues from role swapping.
Right.
We got in contact with them to try and understand the decision making behind the role swap, and they told us it was a little bit of a lack of confidence. They figured it out halfway through the series. They returned to their original roles, but it's a bit fearful to hear that a recent world champion is already struggling from confidence issues.
Well, I'm really looking forward to more awesome plays from Korea with Super League starting this weekend, but let's move on to North America, where we had the final two teams qualified for the first regional. Team name change proved that the roster swap bringing in Goku was worth having to sit out one round of qualifiers. They had pretty good synergy in drafting and had some clutch individual plays from many of their members.
Yeah, one player that specifically was Tiger JK. He's a player who, if we look at his past, hasn't had the most success with some of the teams that he's been on, but it feels like recently he may have put in enough time to really try and prove himself as a player. He showed really good mechanics and then also great timing on his heroics as a support that is huge to try and become great. So really good job from him so far in the series, but more importantly, I think it's going to be very telling of his future if he's able to finally translate that online performance to the LAN environment.
Well, speaking of that, the other team to qualify was Astral Authority. So we'll see how their new roster fares in a LAN setting, as well as everybody else next weekend.
And finally, for Europe, we had qualifiers on both Saturday and Wednesday, so we now have 6 out of the 8 teams who will be competing at Gamescom. Keep in mind that Team Dignitas and My Insanity both already have qualified because they competed at DreamHack Summer.
Fnatic maintained their strength from Valencia, getting through fairly easily and showing a lot of the same compositions we saw them playing before.
And to put this gently, Team Liquid looked a little rough around the edges. In game number 1 of the first qualifier, kind of a sloppy core rush, and then game number 2 possibly seeming a little bit too tilted to recover in their gameplay overall, so they had to wait for the next qualifier to try and make it onto Gamescom.
Well, regardless of reasoning, the new roster of Crowing Chickens was able to qualify alongside Fnatic on Saturday, and we had 2 more teams join their ranks on Wednesday.
There are a lot of amazing plays that happened this week in competitive Heroes of the Storm, so we picked out some of our favorites, and we're going to look at them in this week's top plays.
At number 3 is a play from the North American qualifiers where Miasma Esports distracts Savage Gaming by pretending to rush core while their Vikings player, Short Steve, solos a boss.
Miasma abusing Brightwing's disengage of team fights and her global to bait Savage back into their base. They later display a great understanding of win conditions and manipulating the map on Cursed Hollow.
Number 2 shows the team fight potential for L5 during the Power League, as well as the strength of Tyrael as they get a 5-man sanctification, utilizing Holy Ground at 16 several times to zone Tempo Storm from escaping.
Can't forget the almost flawless Sunder from Jung Ha, hitting 3 people, pinning them all against the wall for a perfect Holy Ground follow-up from SCSC. Great teamwork from L5.
And at number 1 is another fight from the Power League that devolves into madness when Tempo Storm has to use Sanctification early on in the fight to save Greymane. They then overstay their welcome and lose Thrall. On their retreat, L5 continues the chase, with Duck Duck getting a perfect Haunting Wave over the wall. But it still looks great for L5 as they force Tempo Storm into a choke until Dami finds a victim to sink his teeth into and even up the odds.
The communication on this play for the players to be scattered all over the map and then later meet back up and stack themselves for Righteousness and Storm Shield to get the upper hand in this team fight. Tempo Storm once again showing the beauty in heroes when skill and teamwork are combined.
Those were some of our favorite plays this week. Before we talk about what to watch in the coming week, let's first hear from some of the top players worldwide about how they came up with their name.
I used to play in the fighting game community in Las Vegas, so like most of the players there know me. I was playing against a player called Edma, and I played Ken in Street Fighter. I was bodying one of my friends, and then he just started yelling Kenma because it's like Edma, and it just sucked. And I've just been using it ever since then.
Rolling on the floor, laughing, can't operate properly until eyes refocus, I think. Something like that.
제가 군대 가기 전에 술을 되게 좋아했어요. 술을 되게 먹고 막 사고도 치고 그러다 보니까 이제 갔다 오고 나서부터 이제 안 먹게 되더라고요. 그래가지고 이제 술을 항상 많이 마셨던 그 철없던 시절을 다시는 이제 되돌리지 않기 위해서 그냥 겸사겸사 해가지고 그냥 사케라고 했어요.
I stole the ID back then when I was very young. I guess it happened and I became famous as Haseop, so I just got stuck with it. And the funny thing is I never met the guy who owned the name before, and I also never met someone who knew him, so I guess I got lucky there.
단어책에 있는 뜻 말고 저만의 뜻으로 아이디를 만들어 보고 싶은 거예요. 그래서 제 이름이 김경덕이니까 끝 글자 2개를 써서 만들어 보자 해서 만들어 봤고, 또 제가 오리고기를 좋아해가지고 만들게 됐어요.
Tomorrow is a very big day for competitive Heroes of the Storm as it is the start of the Korean Super League. Keep in mind that Super League is the qualifier for BlizzCon in the Korean region. Some of the best teams in the world compete at this event, so make sure to tune in for some great games over the upcoming months.
Tomorrow is also the last chance for European teams to qualify for Gamescom. Check out Caldor's stream to see which 2 teams will claim those final spots.
And finally, for North America, next weekend we are going to have our very first regional in Burbank. Tune in next week to hear not only some of the groups and the matchups that are happening, but our predictions for the event.
But until then, we'll see you in the Nexus.